everyone, and welcome to another VM.PL Software House Meetup. Today we are here with Mr. Roland Bühler from omnichannel. Hello, Roland.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, it's a very big pleasure to have so many people here with us today. We will still wait another 3 to 4 minutes for everyone to join. We are here on our another VM.PL meetup that we have organized together with our partner. Today, as I said, is Roland Bühler from omnichannel, and we will be talking about Scrum and what has changed in 2020. And maybe this will help us to work better in 2021. And as I see, everyone is hoping for 2021 to be better, right, Roland?
Definitely. I guess 2021 could be a good year compared to 2020. And maybe also Scrum can do something for that, despite other things. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here and really looking forward to this meetup in order to talk about agile development, and especially the news that come with the Scrum Guide. And yeah, let's see what we have on our discussion today.
So, Roland, are you ready? Do you have anything to add in the beginning?
I'm ready. Looking forward, especially to the interactive session after the brief video clip, which we will show, where I give some basic info about Scrum, about Agile, about especially the changes which came with the new Scrum Guide on 2020. Maybe some words about myself and my company. I support companies related to consulting and project management when it comes to implementation of marketing technology. So
welcome everyone, and let's watch the webinar. I'm gonna stop my video and mute myself and turn on the recording. Thank you for your attention, and let's see what is new with Scrum.
Hello and welcome in this meetup. My name is Roland Bühler, and in the next couple of minutes I want to give you an update on Scrum. The new Scrum Guide has been released in November 2020. It looks like this, quite unspectacular, 13 pages, compared to the old guide, which contained 19 pages. And you directly see they removed the pictures of the founders, Jess Sutherland and Ken Schwaber, which was on the front page on the old guide, but there are further changes inside, of course. Some topics are new, some topics have been removed, and some topics have been changed. In general, we can say that the new Scrum Guide is more open to other use cases apart from IT. And I guess that's the main benefit, but we will have a closer look at the most important changes later in this meetup. Before we start with those details, I want to give a brief intro for all those of you who are completely new to agile project management in terms of the various flavors of methods. Probably most of you know waterfall methods. This is the classical way to do project management. And typically here you start with clear planning, predictive planning. Starting, for instance, with specification, design, development, integration, and testing. Of course, those phases depend always on the type of project. There can be other phases, but in general, you have really clear planning. And you need to document, you need to specify a lot of topics up front, because you want to have clear deliverables at the end of the project. And typically this could be problematic in many cases, because often you experience change during a project. Often you experience new findings, new feedback from users based on testing, first experience, and so on. And that's why in waterfall model it's often a challenge to consider change, because you need to document a lot again. A lot of topics have to be approved again. You need new cost estimates which have been approved, for instance. And that's why change often leads to massive problems if you stick to a waterfall model. Of course, in some cases, you need to use a waterfall model. If you build a house, for instance, you cannot build the roof without knowing how the basement will look. So that is clear. Here you have to go step by step because everything depends on each other, and it's quite difficult to consider change here. But for instance, in IT, it's welcome. Change is welcome, and anyway, you will have change if you work in a waterfall model or if you use an agile model. Let's have a look at the agile world, the agile models. Here you work in iterations. Every iteration leads to a releasable product which can be used, which can be tested, which can be released. And each and every iteration probably leads to further insights, further learnings, further maybe changes, which can then be considered in subsequent iterations. So each and every iteration contains a, let's say, mini project consisting of specification, design, development, integration, testing, or other steps, of course, dependent on the project type. But each and every iteration leads to something which you can use, which the stakeholders can use in the end. And that's why it's open to change, because after each iteration you can change the plans, but in a controlled way. So the idea is not to be chaotic, but to embrace change, to welcome change, and to handle it in a good and controlled way. So the typical situation in an agile model is that you don't know upfront in detail what you will have at the end of the project, because the feedback, the change within the project will be considered. And one of the most famous agile frameworks mainly used in IT is Scrum. And let's have a look at some basics of Scrum in order to have a better understanding later if we talk about the changes in the new Scrum Guide. I mentioned earlier that in Scrum you don't specify everything up front in an agile model, but you specify step by step as far as you can specify. And typically this specification is done with a product backlog. And this product backlog consists of many items, and each and every item describes, for instance, a requirement. And you specify those items in an order. So those items which it can be already specified are on the top of that, let's say, stack. And those items which are still far away, where it's probably hard to gather detailed requirements, where maybe you need some first experience on other items up front, they are at the bottom of this product backlog. And so step by step you will qualify your product backlog as far as you can. And typically, in many cases, it's done with so-called user stories, which enable a specification from a requirements point of view. Typically you say a user story as this and that person, I want to do this and that in order to achieve this and that. For instance, as a shop user, I want to see a list of all my orders in order to have a budget overview. And based on such user stories, you can create such a product backlog, and in some cases you are maybe not 100% sure about the requirements, and those user stories, those items will be at the bottom. In order to start a first sprint in Scrum, it's important that you have some user stories, some items at the top of your product backlog in order to start a sprint. And therefore it's important that these user stories, these items, are specified sufficiently to start with the development. And once you start with the first sprint, the team comes together. We will have a closer look at how the team looks later on. And in such a sprint planning meeting, you take a couple of items from your product backlog from the top, and you discuss how, including some other questions which we'll have on our agenda later on, to start a sprint. And based on those items, you will have a development phase of 1 to 4 weeks, which is called sprint. And in this period of time, the sprint backlog will be developed. The aim is to develop the sprint backlog. And in order to have control, in order to see whether there are some problems, in order to see how you proceed within your sprint, there's a daily meeting which is called Daily Scrum. And here the team comes together to have a, let's say, daily check whether everything is running fine. I will come to that also a little bit later when we talk about the changes. When 1 or 4 or 2 weeks are over, the idea is to have an increment. Something has been developed which can be then presented in a sprint review meeting where the stakeholders meet the team, where the increment, the new product, the additional functionality, whatever, the new marketing concept in order to see it in other use cases apart from IT as well, is presented, and where the stakeholders can directly start using testing, gathering experience. And that is the great idea beyond Scrum, that after each iteration you have something in your hands which you can directly use. And also in this sprint review meeting we'll have a look whether all the requirements from our backlog are met, whether maybe an item could not be developed in that sprint because there was in the end maybe not enough time to complete that, and such items will be put back to the product backlog in order to consider it in subsequent sprints again in order to complete it. And maybe also here directly new items will be found when you have a look at a product for the first time. This could be considered in the product backlog, or afterwards during a testing phase by the stakeholders. Such further product backlog items will be created. So you see, it's a really agile way of working, and there's a further aspect. If we have a look at the increment, there's the definition of done. And the definition of done is, let's say, a quality criteria. For instance, information security wise, for instance, privacy wise, for instance, related to a specific company standard, which needs to be fulfilled in order to see an increment as done. So also here we check whether the increment meets our definition of done. After our sprint review, we have a sprint retrospective where the team internally discusses improvements. So here we have the idea to continuously optimize the way of working. For instance, if you have the problem that many times you don't meet the sprint goal, that not all the sprint backlog items could be developed within a sprint, this is typically something to discuss here, how to optimize such topics. And after that, we will have our next sprint. And it starts with a updated product backlog, maybe with some new topics. And yeah, here you start with a new sprint planning meeting, and then we have our further iteration, our further sprint. And like this, iteration by iteration, sprint by sprint, we have increments after each and every sprint, and in the end, an agile developed product. Now I'm coming to the changes, and a closer look what is new, what has been removed, and what has been added to the new Scrum Guide. Let's directly start with maybe an overarching topic in the new Scrum Guide. It's less prescriptive. As I mentioned, there are less pages, and the idea was to make the Scrum Guide more open to other use cases. That's why some quite detailed descriptions, recommendations, good best practice has been removed from the Scrum Guide. And this is a little bit ambivalent from my point of view. On one hand, it's great to have a simpler Scrum Guide. It's great to have it more open, but especially if you are new to Scrum, maybe some useful best practice, good practice tips are missing here. Let's have a look at an example. I mentioned the daily Scrum earlier, and in the old Scrum Guide we had a quite long chapter here, and for instance there were 3 questions to be asked in such a daily Scrum. What did I do yesterday that helped the development team meet the sprint goal? What will I do today to help the development team meet the sprint goal? Do I see any impediment that prevents me or the development team from meeting the sprint goal? So like this, you can have a quite structured way to have this short meeting every day, answered by every team member here. And this is good practice, definitely, but maybe not for each and every use case. I experienced myself that in some Scrum projects, yes, you answered to those questions day by day, but maybe there was no added value, because other questions would be more useful to have an effective daily Scrum. And this is considered by the new Scrum Guide now, because here we only say the developers can select whatever structure and techniques they want, as long as their daily Scrum focuses on progress toward the sprint goal and produces an actionable plan for the next day of work. This creates focus and improves self-management. Quite interesting. So it's completely up to you how to organize it. Nice on one hand. On the other hand, maybe those 3 questions which we had in the old Scrum Guide could be useful in many cases. So some good practice removed, maybe some will miss it, maybe on the other hand it will make Scrum more open. Let's have another look at topics that have been removed or shortened. In the old Scrum Guide we have a whole, let's say, sub-chapter in terms of the sprint cancellation. It's quite detailed described when and how and what happens if a sprint needs to be cancelled, and I like especially that last sentence: sprint cancellations are often traumatic to the Scrum team and are very uncommon. Yeah, probably true. Maybe not traumatic in each and every case, because maybe they can do a holiday if the sprint is cancelled, but joke aside, there's a lot of, let's say, information and best practice which could be useful for people who are new to Scrum. In the new Scrum Guide 2020, we have just 2 sentences. A sprint could be cancelled if the sprint goal becomes obsolete. Only the product owner has the authority to cancel the sprint. So it's clear to the point. There's no blah blah, there's no additional information in terms of best practice, good practice, whatever. But this is maybe also a key change which we experience also in other parts of the new Scrum Guide. It's just focused, a little bit shorter, and of course therefore open to other business areas apart from IT as well. There's a further change in terms of the team setup in Scrum. And before we come to that, I'd also like to explain the responsibilities in Scrum based on the old Scrum Guide. We have the product owner. He or she is the one who is responsible for the product backlog, for the requirements, and therefore interacts, for instance, with a customer or to gather those requirements. Let's say in a nutshell, the product owner is the interface in between the stakeholders, the customers, and the Scrum team. Furthermore, we have the Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is the one which is responsible for the way Scrum is lived and that the Scrum rules are considered. Let's say also a consultant in terms of how to use Scrum if there are any questions. And last but not least, we have the development teams. Those who really do the work, those who develop the product, consisting of several developers. In general, we have small teams in Scrum environments. And all this is a Scrum team according to the guide 2017. And you directly see here, we have a kind of a team in a team. We have the development team with several developers, and we have the Scrum team, including the Scrum Master and the product owner. And this has changed if we have a look at the new Scrum Guide. There is no development team anymore, but there are developers, product owner and Scrum Master. So we don't have this team in the team situation anymore. And personally, I like this idea from a team building point of view. Have a look at a soccer team. If you have the football players and you have the trainer, for instance, is the trainer belonging to the soccer team or is it outside? And here we don't have any outside inside, we just have one Scrum team, including all members. And we don't have this thinking of us and them if we have a look at a developer. So I guess from a team building perspective, this is a good step in order to say, okay, we are one team and no further team inside a team. And maybe you have heard already up front, I a little bit highlighted the word responsibility. And that's also a change of the new Scrum Guide. In the old Scrum Guide, we had responsible persons. responsibilities. And in the new Scrum Guide 2020, we talk about accountability. And of course, this is a little bit stronger than only responsibilities. Maybe at the first glance, it's only a wording, but I guess there's more behind it because it really says, okay, you are accountable for something. As a product owner, you're accountable for this and that, compared to being, let's say, only responsible. A completely new topic in the Scrum Guide 2020 is the product goal. Let's have a closer look at this. We know already the sprint goal from the old Scrum Guide. Each and every sprint we have our sprint goal, which we consider in our sprint where we aim to achieve this goal. But we didn't have any, let's say, overarching goal apart from each and every sprint. And in 2020, now we have the product goal, an overarching goal connected to the product. And I really like that idea. Maybe it was always somehow present, because I guess no one did a project without an, let's say, overarching goal, but it was not officially inside Scrum. If we have a look at other project management methods, such as Prince2, for instance, there's a business case, an overarching business case, which is always present. And in Prince2, you talk about stages, and after every stage, if you go to a new stage, you check whether you are still on track towards the business case. And now we have a similar element in Scrum as well, which is the product goal. And I guess this is always good to have it in mind. Maybe you had it earlier as well in your mind when you did projects, but to highlight it is good. And also, if you have a look at the daily work, maybe in many cases you lose focus because you are working on the details, because you just talk about this button and that Excel export and that interface and those small topics. But here, I guess, to have a overarching product goal is nice. I like that idea. And in addition, there's also a definition of a product in the new Scrum Guide, and it says a product is a vehicle to deliver value. It has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. And I like that product definition as well, because also here we directly see it's not only about IT. It could be a service, it could be a physical product, it could be a piece of software, of course, as well. But especially if it comes to the development of services, of new services, Scrum might be very powerful, because here you also depend on the users, on the stakeholders' feedback. And I like that the new Scrum Guide is more open to such use cases as well. Let's talk about commitments. Commitment is also a strong topic in the new Scrum Guide 2020. We know already the sprint goal. We discussed that earlier. And we know already the definition of done. We discussed that earlier. And we have our new product goal. And apart from the product goal, which is new anyway, in the former Scrum Guide, the sprint goal and the definition of done were, from a Scrum Guide documentation point of view, a little bit lost. And this has changed now, because the Scrum Guide clearly says that there's a connection from the sprint goal to the sprint backlog. There's a connection from the definition of done to the increment. So only if I meet the definition of done, the increment is done. And last but not least, there is a connection in between the product backlog, the product goal, and the product backlog. So on the right side we have the three artifacts of Scrum, and now they are connected to those goals on the left side. That makes it very clear, and whenever you have your goals, you exactly know to which artifact they are connected. I like that idea. Maybe it was obvious also before, but now it's clearly defined in the new Scrum Guide. Self-managing. Maybe that is also just a wording, but let's have a closer look. In 2017, the Scrum team was self-organizing. In 2020, the Scrum team is self-managing. And if we have a closer look at those words now, I say, okay, managing, there's a little bit more inside in order also to decide than in order to just organize. Some say it's only a wording, some others say yeah, there is a big impact behind. I don't know whether it really changes the way we work. I leave it up to you to decide how you consider this change in your daily work. In terms of the sprint planning, already in the old guide we had topics to consider. We had a question what, and we had a question how. So in the sprint planning we discussed what can be done in the sprint. I guess that's quite obvious that it would be good to discuss that, and it would be also discuss how will the chosen work get done. So two basic questions, and without those questions probably such a sprint planning a meeting wouldn't make any sense, for sure. But now we have the why, and I'm really keen on that why. Why is this sprint valuable? And we come back also here to the why question in our sprint goal, in our product goal, and we come to the why question, which is in every user story at the end. As a user, I want to see a list of all my orders in order to have a budget overview, for instance. And there we have clearly the why, and the why is everywhere, but sometimes it's hidden. And I guess it's always good to have the why in mind, because the why might especially have an influence on the how. And that's why I really like this third sprint planning question, because I guess it prevents us from just doing because someone told us, doing just because the customer told us, doing just because the product owner told us. Continuous delivery is focus in the new Scrum Guide. We say here, multiple increments may be created within a sprint. The sum of the increments is presented at a sprint review, thus supporting empiricism. So that is probably quite clear. So in the sprint review, we decide whether everything is fine, we decide whether we throw something back to the product backlog. But however, an increment may be delivered to stakeholders prior to the end of a sprint. The sprint review should never be considered as a gate to releasing value. And this is something which is highlighted in the new Scrum Guide, which was not there in that way before, and probably it's the answer to DevOps clearly. And we see here we can continuously deliver, and also in a sprint we can deliver, and I guess that is quite important. And there's another message behind that. It's no longer up to the product owner to be part of that decision whether something will be released or not. So this is also a change which is inside here, because you can, of course, you need to make your internal agreements on how you want to work, but potentially based on the Scrum Guide you could do continuous deliveries inside a sprint. Let's have a look at some other bits and pieces based on the new Scrum Guide. Some small topics. The definition of done has changed into the definition of done. You see only the quotes have been removed, but it's a small change, but maybe it's better to have a definition of done instead of having a definition of done. There are no longer estimates. Instead, there is a size. We don't have an estimate in terms of the backlog items. We have a size of the backlog item now. Maybe also just the wording. There's no estimation anymore in the new Scrum Guide. We talk about size. But maybe I also leave it up to you whether it will have an impact in your daily work. And maybe also just the wording, but maybe more behind it. A servant leader from the old Scrum Guide, the Scrum Master, for instance, turns into a true leader. And maybe also just the wording. I know different opinions on that topic. Some say, okay, true is, let's say, whatever, more powerful, whatever, has a better, let's say, impact in the organization. On the other hand, servant leader is maybe not that fussy as a true leader. I also leave it up to you to make your thoughts on this, and there are some further topics which have been changed, but I would like to come to the main topic. From my point of view, Scrum is really for everyone. It has always been for everyone, but with a really strong focus on IT. Of course, IT will be still a typical main use case of Scrum for sure, but now it's for everyone, especially based on the removals of topics. It's more open. It's for every use case where agile frameworks can apply, and that I really like. On the other hand, as it's for everyone, as I mentioned earlier, some good practice, some best practice examples have been removed, and I would still like to have access to such examples, but you will have to access this information now outside the Scrum Guide. I personally would have to wish to have something like an appendix where maybe some good practice would be shown inside the Scrum Guide, but of course there is a lot of resources where you can access such information as well. For instance, things like the 3 questions in the daily Scrum, or alternatives to the 3 questions in the daily Scrum, just to mention one example. Furthermore, let's come to the Scrum Values. And the good news here, nothing has changed. We still have commitment, focus, openness, respect, and courage. So Scrum has still the same values. The Scrum Guide has less pages. Scrum is more open. There are, I guess, a lot of powerful things which are new or where things have been removed, which leads to more power of the Scrum Guide. In some cases, I'm not sure whether it's just a wording or whether there's some value or some real change behind it. I'm really looking forward to our Q&A session now in order to answer to your question, in order to discuss, in order to hear about your experience, maybe if you directly started working already with the new Scrum Guide. Looking forward for that. For the moment, thank you very much.
Thank you, Roland, for this presentation. It was very nice to see and hear everything in such detail as you explained it. I think it was very clear, and even me, who is not an IT professionalist, understood everything, and I hope I can speak for everyone. What do you think about this new Scrum Guide? What was the main goal to introduce those changes? And was it just wording, as you said a couple of times? Was it to make it more accessible for everyone? What do you think?
I guess from my personal perspective, based on my project, based on my, let's say, scope of work, I would say that the main benefit is really that it's definitely open for other use cases. Now, that's what I really like, because in many cases in the past, I was in a kind of a Scrum but environment. We did Scrum, but we missed something, we did something in another way, because we adapted Scrum to this other particular use case. And now I guess with this new Scrum Guide, which is more open, as I mentioned, we definitely have the possibility to do Scrum, let's say, in a proper way without doing changes which are in contradiction with the specification. So that's what I like. But as I mentioned as well, this leads, of course, to a Scrum Guide with only 13 pages with less best practice. But I guess there are other resources for this best practice. And furthermore, what I really like, and this is also one of my favorites, is the product goal. Because I experienced often that people tend to be lost in the details somehow. And this is something what I really like when it comes to other methods such as Prince2, as I mentioned. Here you have a clear connection to a business case, which includes, let's say, product specification, aims in terms of the product. And I guess this is very important to highlight it, because then you really have a clear scope, not a fuzzy scope, because sometimes we are lost in, let's say, details, and then we have some agileness within the project. We have our stakeholders, we have customers, we have feedback, and suddenly maybe we have a scope which changes from the original business case, from the original product, from the original service, for instance, which might be okay, but you have to be aware of that. It's quite important, because otherwise, that is not good to do the change by random. You have to control the change here if the product changes.
Okay, thank you very much for the explanation. We have a couple of questions to answer. First, Marta Stojmanowska is saying, thank you, Roland, very nice comparison, Scrum Guide 2017.
Thank you for that.
The first question is from Jakub Orczyk from VM.PL. Will it be difficult for the ongoing Scrum teams to adjust, or if Roland would advise to do not change the method in ongoing projects? What is your opinion? Will it be difficult, or is your advice to not change anything at all?
I guess the question is whether or how the change impacts your project. It might be the case that in some cases you don't have a big impact on the change because it's still Scrum, and maybe you did it in a way which still fits to the new guide. I would always recommend, and I did it always like that, to see, does it fit to the project, not to follow any specification, not to follow any guides just because of the guide. have a look at the change, and if you say, okay, for instance, the product goal is exactly what we missed, and this is a big benefit, introduce it. If you say everything is running fine, we don't need any further topics here, but then it's okay. So I would consider it individually.
One of Scrum values is openness. Yes, so you have to be open to changes, even to Scrum, to
introduce
Scrum changes.
Definitely.
Okay, and the next question is from Mr. Falk Kagelmacher. Are you happy with the removal of estimation? He personally thinks it is a helpful tool, and he might just keep on using it when necessary. What do you think? He is a Scrum Master. He is a Scrum coach. Sorry.
Yeah, I see it in the same way. Estimations are sizes now, and from my point of view, I also had my let's say difficulties whether we totally neglect estimations and its sizes now, because probably in real life it will be still an estimation, because in many cases you will have to estimate, and so I think even if we call it size, in real life maybe it will be still an estimation. I guess in some cases it's just a wording, and I agree to you.
Okay, a question from Robin. Is there a difference between product vision and product goal?
So that is a good question. I would say it's the same here, because the product goal is a new wording in the new Scrum guide, and this is from my point of view the same topic here.
Next comment is from Achim. I think the why is also missed very often. This is important, and I think this is what I would also like to agree, because why is always the reason why you do it for the client, for example, or for your company, and when you miss it, then you miss the goal.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I mentioned that also in the video. Often we forget the why, and we really have to know why we do the things, and sometimes we even lost in our specifications in the details, and just considering the why helps all of us, all the stakeholders, also the customers on the other hand, to understand things, because sometimes you just say, oh, I need to have that Excel export. That's always maybe a typical example, and you don't ask why do you need it, and that's crucial from my point of view.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. The next one, does the new Scrum Guide prevent previous good practices, or is everything still possible as before?
So I would say, as it's more open, in general, we can say it's still possible. And a good example maybe is the 3 questions in a daily Scrum. Of course, you can use those questions if it helps you. And on the other hand, the new Scrum Guide doesn't mention it anymore, but of course you can still use those questions, but you can also go ahead with totally different questions. That's just one example, and also maybe the example I mentioned in terms of the sprint cancellation. Also here, some best practice, half a page in the old guide. Yeah, this is useful information. So I would say there is no conflict in between the old best practice and the new guide in general, because the new guide in almost every case it's more open here.
Yeah. So the next question I think also connects with the best practices. How should Scrum Master conduct daily Scrum with these changes? I suppose if you have some best practice already, then you should use them still, right?
Yeah, I guess it's maybe a little bit more, let's say, preparation needed, or maybe some consideration by the Scrum Master in order to see how do we conduct a daily meeting ideally, because there's less prescription. And this is up to the Scrum Master to help here to make this meeting effective. And so maybe it's not only to stick to those 3 questions, which was in this old Scrum Guide, but really to consider which might be helpful. And by the way, this is something I experienced very often, that you had those 3 questions, and sometimes you answered them because they were there. But maybe in some projects, not that useful. Other questions would be more useful. For instance, I was in a marketing project with a small IT part, but the other parts were rather related to design topics as well. And here we had technical specification, we had design, that means not IT design, but let's say nice looking design. And there was a regular question, do we have any implication of the design approach to the technical approach, and vice versa? So these were two questions we considered as useful in a daily Scrum within that project, just for instance.
Thank you for that clarification. Next one. Previously with Daily Scrum, each team member used to talk about his progress with user stories, which helped to understand reaching towards goal and finding out impediments. If we don't ask those three questions, how to conduct Daily Scrum?
Yeah. So it's not forbidden to ask those three questions. You can still do that, and I still guess that those three questions are a good way to have a look at the projects in order to find the impediments. So they might be good, but if you have maybe also other techniques to follow the progress, maybe you do it with a system, you just look at a chart, you just look at a screen where you directly track it. Maybe you see it already and you can omit those questions, but it really depends. And clearly, it's not forbidden. It's just this piece of best practice is missing.
Christian asks, please could you speak again about definition of done? What is most important to remember?
Yeah. So in general, there is no let's say really major change in terms of the definition of done. There's the clear connection in between the definition of done to the increment, and typically a definition of done is a, let's say, basic, often overarching requirement which has to be met, as I mentioned, for instance, information security standards. For instance, the company's design for user interfaces which have to stick to a particular design guide, for instance, things like that. And this is something which has to be considered. And now the new Scrum Guide, there's a more clearer, let's say, connection as it was before. It was in the old Scrum Guide as well, but now it's clearly stated the definition if done is the commitment to the increment. So no increment without a definition of done, which has been met.
Okay, we have a comment here, all, and especially to Roland. Thanks for the for information provision and exchange. Thank you for participating in our event. Thank you for being our guest. The last one that we have here, without the three questions, don't you think the daily meeting might become a one-way where the master talks?
That's a very good question, and it really depends on the team. And sometimes, often. IT guys are not very extroverted. They are sometimes introverted people. In some cases, I know there are many of you in this call.
Well, the Scrum Master is introverted and no one speaks at all.
Maybe as well. So it really depends on the people. It depends on the culture. I still like the three questions, and as mentioned, they are not forbidden. And if you feel that you have an advantage of the three questions, use those three questions, but use other questions. I guess also to come back to that question, whether it might be a one-way communication. I guess a structure, a particular agreed culture within a daily Scrum is important. Not just come together and maybe have a one-way talk by the Scrum Master, maybe have a second breakfast at 10 o'clock. It's from my point of view important to have a structure, and that's always also what this new Scrum Guide says: have a structure, but it's up to you. It's fully up to you to decide which structure meets the requirements. And again, it's up, or maybe a further challenge for the Scrum Master to help here to find the right way in order to prevent that it's a one-way communication, which definitely we should avoid, because otherwise we wouldn't need a daily meeting.
Yeah, I think on that point that it's up to you. We should end because all in all, we all work for ourselves and for our organizations. So if we introduce those changes, then we will work with those changes. If not, then no. Yeah, that's very simple, I guess.
Message from my side: use it in a pragmatic way. Use it so that it fits to your organization, and the new Scrum Guide is a good step towards that aim. That's why I like it. And maybe just a side remark: there is the scaled usage of Scrum. For instance, Scrum at scale. For instance, Nexus. And also here there are new guides which consider the new Scrum Guide. They have just recently published in January 2021, and maybe this is content for another meetup.
Yeah, we are very open
We will see.
to have another meetup with you. Okay, thank you everyone for the questions. We hope we have answered all of them, and it is much clearer now to introduce new Scrum within your organizations. Thank you, Roland, for creating the presentation. Maybe tell everyone where they can find you. Maybe your website, maybe your contact info.
Yeah, you can find me at www.rb-omnichannel.com. This is my website. And furthermore, I guess we will also have a recording of that webinar, which will be published. Otherwise, thank you, Daniel, for me to invite me to this meetup. It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to get in touch with all of you. Thanks for the questions. And I'm also continuously learning when it comes to the implementation of Scrum. And just one remark, there's one sentence also missing in the new Scrum Guide, that is that Scrum is hard to manage. This is not part anymore, which is good. And from that point of view, stay agile and have a good year 2021.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining. You can also go to our YouTube channel at VM.PL Software House. We also have a recording from our previous webinar about how Agile helped VM.PL grow 800% in 4 years. So we, with this meetup, we continued the previous subject. And as Roland said, we will have a recording probably very soon, probably this month, on our YouTube as well. And if you joined after we started, then you can watch it for yourself at home whenever you want. Okay, so once again, thank you very much. Thank you, Roland, and hopefully we will see again very soon.
With pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.